Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today at SEDAC Energy Code Training Webinar 2018 IECC Update. My name is Sumi Han. We also have Ryan Siegel next to me, and we will both will cover today's webinar. Before we start, I would like to mention a few housekeeping items. If you have questions or comments you would like to share during the webinar, you can type in your questions in the Q&A window, and you can type your any other comments in the chat box. The chat box and the Q&A box can be found if you hover over the bottom of the screen. And this webinar is being recorded and will be available, and also the PDF of the presentation slides will be available on the SEDAC website. We would like to introduce SEDAC briefly. Smart Energy Design Assistance Center is an applied research program at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. We work with a collaboration with a private partner, 360 Energy Group, and SEDAC provides advice and analysis to facilities to achieve energy efficiency savings and reduce the Illinois energy footprint. In addition to our traditional energy efficiency services, SEDAC is working with Illinois EPA to provide the Illinois Energy Code Training Program. SEDAC's Energy Code Training Program includes technical support. We have 1-800 number, and we also have an email address, which is energycode@sedac.org. So if you have any questions on energy code, you can always call us or email us. And actually, email is the best way to get us. And also, we have online resources at our website. It's sedac.org/energy-code. And we are also providing in-person workshops and webinars, such as today's event. And also, we have developed online on-demand training modules. Currently, we have published 3 online modules, and 1 more modules will be available in May. So this is to just show you our website for Energy Code Training Program. And some of the features are still being updated, but you could find important information on Illinois Energy Conservation Code from this website. So please visit this website for the updates on the Illinois Energy Conservation Code, and also to find links to web version of 2015 IECC, 2018 IECC, and Illinois amendments, Chicago amendments, and more upcoming events. So for today's topic, 2018 IECC, please follow the link from our website to IECC to have a free access to the entire 2018 IECC. You can click the chapter that you are interested in, and it will expand to show the content in that chapter. We find this web version of the code is especially useful if you use search function because it highlights the keyword that you would like to know. We expect this 2018 IECC will be effective here in Illinois in early 2019. And actually, the adoption process for this new code cycle has already begun. For this time, we would like to talk briefly about the history of the model energy codes improvement. This graph on the x axis, it shows the year. It starts from 1975 to 2018. And the y-axis, it shows the energy use, nominalized energy use. So it's 0 to 100. So the reference point is actually 100 based on the energy code of 1975. And then top part, the orange part shows a residential energy code, and the bottom part shows the commercial in blue. So generally speaking, the ASHRAE 90.1 is used for the commercial part, and IECC is used for the residential code for this graph. So each new edition of ASHRAE 90.1 and IECC, the DOE is required by statute to issue a determination as to whether the updated code will improve energy efficiency. So this graph shows that improvements from the current model code to the next model code, meaning between 2015 IECC and 2015 IECC, there's not a big improvement here. For commercial building, it shows something around 8% improvement, and the residential buildings, it shows virtually 0 improvement. So now we are going to talk about some highlights of the changes in commercial provisions and residential provisions of the IECC 2018 before we dive into the more detailed discussion on major changes item by item. As I just mentioned, there's no significant energy efficiency improvement comparing 2015 IECC and 2018 IECC. The initial analysis estimates 2 to 5% of improvements in commercial provisions. And the new section in 2018 IECC includes building documentation and closeout submittal requirements. So record documents and compliance documents should be provided to the owner within 90 days of certificate of occupancy. Also, training for maintenance should be provided to the owner or owner's agent. Also, definition of approved have changed. So it used to be the approved mean that approval by the code official as a result of investigation and tests conducted by him or her or by a nationally recognized organization. And now that definition of approved has changed to simply acceptable to the code official. This shows a little bit more, autonomy and, responsibility to the code official. And then next changes in commercial provisions of 2018 IECC is there are 2 additional efficiency package options. So to be comply with a 2018 IECC, you have a choice of 3 different compliance paths. One is you can actually take the ASHRAE 90.1 2016, or you can follow the 2018 IECC prescriptive path. And if you do that, you need to pick at least one of the additional efficiency package. So before those additional efficiency package include the more efficient HVAC performance, or more efficient lighting power, so reduced lighting power, or enhanced lighting control, or on-site supply, or renewable energy, or dedicated outdoor air system. On top of that, 2018 IECC added enhanced envelope performance and reduced air infiltration. So for the envelope, if it is more than 15% efficient, then requirement that could be counted as your additional efficiency package. And reduce air infiltration, if the measured measured air infiltration rate, if it doesn't exceed to 0.25 CFM per square foot under pressure differential of 75 Pascal, that could be considered as an additional efficiency package option. And another change in commercial provisions of 2018 IECC is a mechanical section. So mechanical section, there's no major changes, but mostly it is reorganized. So all the provisions for type of equipment or a system are in one place. And also there's a slight language change in controls that applies to HVAC controls and lighting controls. So in 2015 IECC, it used to say the controls should be capable of something. And now in 2018 IECC, the language has changed to be configured, meaning that the control should be capable of and also should be programmed to do some function. And also there's a new appendix in commercial section. It's Appendix CA. It's called Solar Ready Zone. And this is not a mandatory section, but it is appendix and optional appendix for future solar systems. So if the municipalities or choose to adopt this section, then it is available there, so it could be used for the future solar system. So it's a section or sections of the roof of building overhang designated and reserved for future installation of solar system. And lastly, about the highlights of the commercial provisions of 2018 IECC, we would like to briefly mention about ASHRAE 90.1 2016, because this is a compliance path that you could follow. There are two major changes in ASHRAE 90.1 2016. One that affect us here in Illinois is there's a new climate zone map. So actually there are 6 counties in Illinois that the climate zone has changed from 4A to 5A. But remember, if you follow the 2018 IECC, not the ASHRAE path, then the climate zone in 2018 IECC has not changed. And under the ASHRAE 90.1 2016, there's a Appendix G, and this one has been used for mainly for the lead compliance, and it was not used for the code compliance in 2015 IECC, but now it is actually a code compliance path too. And compared to commercial, residential, there are not many changes. And even the energy efficiency improvement, the estimate is 0%. I think it was like 53 to 53 in terms of energy use. So there's no major changes. And also the definition of approved has changed, the same as commercial section. And another small language change under inspection. So it used to say that construction or work shall remain accessible and exposed, and now in 2018 IECC it states visible and able to access for inspection. And maybe there are two major changes in residential, but we're going to talk about it a little bit more detail and later on. Those two may be the buried duct and ERI, and we'll talk about it later. So now I think it's a good time to break a little bit and then spend a couple of seconds to do the polling. And because we would like to know a little bit more of about our audience today, so if you can just click there's number 1 question and number 2 question on the poll window. So number 1 question is, what is your relationship to the building industry? Are you an architect, engineer, or code official? We would like to know, a little bit more about you. So this information could be really useful for us because we are in development of a code training program, as I mentioned before. So if you can just participate in this poll, that'd be great. We will just wait a few more seconds so you can participate, and we'll share this result with you so you will know who else, what would be your colleague on this webinar today. Seems like we have lots of architects and engineers. Okay, so half and half, I would say, engineers and architects and some code officials. And I think they're probably from the public sector facilities. And we understand that you guys are interested more in commercial industrial than residential. And that's we're glad to see that because we kind of organize this webinar that way too. So thank you. So now we are going to talk about the changes in 2018 IECC commercial provisions, item by item. We will not be able to cover all the changes, but we try to highlight some changes here. And Ryan will take over from here. Ryan?
Thank you, Sumi. All right, as we dive down into the commercial sector, one change here is for heated slabs. There's now required to be continuous insulation under the heated slab. Now this applies to both commercial and residential, but we're going to highlight it here in the commercial sector. Something that this does is obviously providing not only the insulation under the slab, but it also provides that thermal break between your slab and the ground, so the heat is not just conducted directly away from your slab and actually goes into the space rather than into the ground. Another modification is for isolation of combustion appliances, particularly water heaters, furnaces, and other heating equipment. In the 2015 IECC, this was one of the newer sections is to isolate the combustion appliances from the conditioned thermal space. And what the 2018 does is it further clarifies minimum construction for these separate rooms. Now, I will note that in the 2015 Illinois Energy Conservation Code, this section was amended out due to the increased cost of building these rooms. It's unknown at this point whether this will also be amended out in 2018 or not. So this may or may not come to bear here in the state of Illinois. Obviously, using the exception to this makes it for an easy alternative is just to install sealed combustion or high efficiency heating and domestic water heating equipment as depicted in the photos, as this uses combustion air from outside rather than using indoor conditioned air for the combustion. Moving towards the outside of the building, dealing with vestibules. With this provides some further guidance that vestibules are designed to be tempering spaces between the outside and indoor space, and these are not supposed to be fully conditioned spaces. Previous practice, it was common to see vestibules that were over-conditioned. So in the winter, they would be heated to a higher degree than the indoor air, such that when the outside doors would open to try to be more of a compensating factor from the cold outside to the indoor environment. So with this, requiring controls that turn off the heat anytime the outside air is above 45 degrees, and providing thermostat limits as far as heating no higher than 60 degrees and cooling no colder than 85 degrees. Now there is an exception for facilities that may have site recovered energy, whether that's solar energy, combined heat and power, or other source of site recovered energy. You may also use transfer air from the building that otherwise might be exhausted. So this could be a way to get some additional use out of air just before you exhaust it from the building. As variable frequency drives get less and less expensive, that makes it much more cost effective on smaller and smaller equipment. It used to be that horsepower 10 and larger had to have variable frequency drives. It's now down to 2 horsepower and larger. Now there is some allowance for demand controlled pumps for those facilities that have DDC controls. Pumps up to 7.5 horsepower may be excluded from requiring VFDs, but this depends on your application and your location, whether they're on heating systems, cooling systems, and whether you're in zone 4A or 5A. Another large change is going to be minimizing the amount of airflow and the minimum, the amount of turn down that systems are required to have. It used to be that the minimum airflow in the 2015 IECC required no more than 30% of the maximum airflow, and now the minimum needs to be set to no greater than 20% of this maximum. What this does is, as you can see this yellow triangle down here, this is where you are both providing fan power, heating, and cooling. And so you're spending a lot of energy for no substantial benefit. And so, as demonstrated here, when you go from 30% down to 20%, this triangle gets substantially smaller. So that's that'll be a big improvement for those who are paying the utility bills. Going a little further as far as heating and air conditioning control for buildings, these are in the group R1, hotels, motels type of buildings. For those that are over 50 guest rooms, you now are required to have automatic heating, ventilation, and air conditioning control and setback. So this includes temperature setbacks, as well as ventilation, disabling ventilation within 30 minutes of occupants leaving guest rooms. One example as far as a control scheme is depicted here using a key card. where as a guest leaves and takes their key card, that lets the system know that the occupant is leaving and can initiate a setback. Now, there is an exception to allow for an automatic daily or pre-occupancy purge of the system. Moving over to the water heating system. Previously, heat traps were required for water heaters. However, now it's required for large hot water storage tanks and not just the water heaters. In the photo here, you can see a physical construction of a heat trap. This could also be provided using a heat trap device built into the water heater or the storage tank itself. As we slide on over to lighting, previously there was requirements for centralized control. There is now provisions in the code to allow for luminaire level lighting control, where each luminaire has its own lighting control on it. This control must include both occupancy sensing as well as ambient light or daylight harvesting controls. This ties very closely together with as far as where occupancy sensors are required, as open office areas were now added to the list as far as where occupancy sensing is now required. I believe this is now the 11th area to be included. And so with that, rather than putting large sensors controlling an entire area, this may be a good application for luminaire level lighting controls, where rather than controlling the entire room, even if only 1 or 2 workstations is in use, luminaire lighting level control would control just the area over each workstation. As lighting continues to get more and more energy efficient, there is now a new exception for daylight responsive controls. And so you are no longer required to have daylighting responsive controls if the building is at least 40% lower wattage connected than the lighting power allowance. So in one example would be looking at an office building. The present table allowed lighting power density would be 0.79 watts per square foot. So if you are below 0.47 watts per square foot, you do not need to have daylighting responsive controls. As we move to the outside of a building, there's now additional requirements as far as lighting level controls for the exterior of buildings. This can be provided either by a single control device or multiple control devices in series. So in this, there's now required to be daylight shut off, as well as you need to turn off decorative lighting during non-business hours. You are still allowed to maintain some lighting for security, but there does need to be a decrease in wattage even for these uses. There must also be time switch control functionality, again tying back to turning it off during non-business hours. Previously, it was common practice to have either daylight controls or time switch functionality. In the 2018 IECC, it's now required to have both. A provision to enhance as far as the flexibility of lighting design is a decrease in the calculated connected wattage for track lighting. Previously it was 30 watts per square foot, and it's now down to 8 watts per square foot. This is predominantly due to the advent and use of compact fluorescents and LEDs in track lights, which allows you to get substantially more light for the same connected power. With LEDs, again, continuing their march for energy efficiency, the lighting power density tables have continued to decline in their allowance. Offices have seen a modest reduction from 2015 to 2018. This is one area that had been made substantial reductions in previous code cycles, here representing only about a 4% change from one code cycle to the next. Libraries took a big hit this time, going from 1.19 down to 0.78. So they have reduced their lighting power allowance by a third. One benefit of these lighting power allowances is when you are sizing your electrical service via the National Electric Code, using energy conservation codes allows you to decrease the size of your service if you are under the provisions of an energy conservation code, assuming that additional provisions are met. So this can be a very big benefit of decreasing the service coming into your building, which is additional expense that you can avoid. Transformers and motors, these are very big users of energy. While lighting is the most visible, motors and transformers account for a very large percentage of electricity consumed by buildings. For transformers, this is an area where, while the two transformers depicted here may look identical, it is very possible that the efficiency of these two could be very different. Transformers are something that very frequently blends into the background, and people don't necessarily think about as far as energy consumption. With transformers, these are operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no matter how many people are or not at the facility. And so being aware of the efficiency of this equipment can bring very large benefits. For transformers, they're required to be Department of Energy 2016 guidelines as a minimum efficiency. And for motors, they're required to be NEMA premium efficiency or better. So they can no longer be NEMA standard efficiency motors. Premium efficiency is now the minimum. If you're going the performance path for the IECC 2018, there is now a limit as far as how much on-site renewable energy you may take credit for when you're doing your simulation. This does not prevent a building from being net zero. However, you may not simulate it with more than 5% credit for renewables. And what this allows, or what this prevents, is the scenario that's depicted on your screen of you could potentially have a net zero greenhouse if you put enough solar panels on it. So looking at it saying you want to do your energy efficiency first and then put your renewables on top of that. If you are taking advantage of reductions in energy cost by having on-site renewables, there is now a provision to allow code officials to request documentation on the renewable energy used for this credit, whether that's array size or windmill size and associated documentation for it. As far as operations and maintenance, this was something Sumi touched on earlier. As far as building documentation must now be provided to the owner so their staff can understand how to operate and, more importantly, maintain the building. This is one challenge that a lot of new buildings have, is with all the new bells and whistles and provisions being added to buildings, they've become more difficult to maintain. And so the energy performance over time frequently degrades in newer buildings. It is not uncommon to see an older building outperform a newer building. because while the older building may have not been as energy efficient when it was first built, the operating and maintenance staff were able to maintain that building's energy performance over time. So before we transition over to the residential side, we want to learn a little bit more about the area of the code that you find most challenging to understand. So we'll give a minute for this.
So as we mentioned, currently we are developing the online energy code modules, and three of the modules are available now, and which is a residential, the first module, and second one is a commercial envelope, and third one is commercial lighting, and then commercial HVAC module will be available soon. And we would like to have your feedback on which sections of the code is most challenging to understand. So that way we know which one we should develop further in the education module. So please spend just a couple of seconds to participate in this poll. We see the HVAC is the number 1, and then building envelope is number 2, and lighting is number 3. So also it's good information for us to know, so we can spend more time and effort on developing the HVAC education module. So thank you for participating in this. And now we are going to talk about the changes in residential provisions of the IECC. And Ryan will take over from here too. Ryan?
All right, so moving over to our residential, very interesting that the building envelope, that the HVAC was twice as many people had challenges with HVAC as opposed to lighting. So on the residential side, there's not nearly as many changes for the 2015 to 2018. Here you can see one of them where Windows has gotten slightly better. This is one of the more frequently missed areas as far as compliance with energy codes and making sure that people are purchasing windows that meet the maximum U factor for the windows. So a slight improvement of about 10% here, but nothing too draconian here. Another change is for ducts that are buried in ceiling insulation. There's now a provision in the code for ducts that are fully buried in the duct or in the insulation for simulated energy performance. And the guidance is that for simulated energy performance, if the ducts are fully buried, they may be considered as having effective duct insulation of R25 for your energy performance model. Now what this looks like here is typically you'll end up seeing a hump here in the insulation where you can see the duct, or where the duct would be underneath the insulation. Now as far as how to determine if ducts are considered within the conditioned space and not losing a substantial amount of their heating or cooling to the unconditioned space. So it must, in order to be in the conditioned space, ducts must be completely inside the air barrier, or they must be fully buried in the ceiling insulation, and the air handler must be within the air and thermal barrier. So no putting your air handler in the garage or vented crawl space. And the duct leakage must test less than 1.5 cubic feet per minute per 100 square foot of conditioned space, and there must be full depth insulation above the duct. So for those people that are up in the northern part of Illinois with an R49 insulation requirement, that must mean that there must, if that's 18 inches thick, that means that there must be that full 18 inches of insulation above the ductwork, not just on the sides of it. There is now minimum fan efficiency requirements for heat recovery ventilators and energy recovery ventilators, here at 1.2 cubic feet per minute per watt. So this is just being aware that because these fans are designed to operate for a minimum of 25% of the year, we want to make sure that we're using efficient fans to do this movement of air. High efficiency lighting continues its march upwards and further into homes. It now, for the 2018, is required to be 90% of the lights installed must be high efficiency. This is up from 75% in the previous code. And there is also the requirement, this also eliminated the exception for low voltage lighting. So low voltage track lighting is no longer excluded from this calculation. Now, for those that do building energy modeling for multifamily, you can now do batches of samples. So like here in this picture where I've got two apartments here side by side that have identical exterior exposures, same footprint, and the like, I only have to run a single building or a single energy model for this apartment, and I can use that model and for compliance for both apartments. This can be very beneficial for larger buildings that may have several units that have identical exposures to reduce the amount of time that it takes to do this modeling. One place where the energy code has become substantially less stringent is for those people that are doing the energy rating index for compliance. The scores have increased substantially from the 2015 IECC to the 2018 IECC as shown here. Here it's shown at an increase from 54 all the way up to 62 and from 55 up to 61. One reason for this substantial increase was many buildings were not using this path because it was seen as more stringent than the other paths. And so by reducing the stringency of this to try to bring the stringency of the three paths in line with one another, these were modified to try to encourage more people to use the energy rating index as a form of compliance. So now I'm going to turn it back over here to Sumi, talk a little bit about the Illinois Code Amendment process.
So for the Illinois to adopt the 2018 IECC as Illinois Energy Conservation Code. State goes through the amendment process. And this shows a form of the public code change proposal form. So Illinois is one of the states who adopt the most recent model energy code. And for each new model code, Illinois is undergoing the adoption process and adopting the model code, in this case, 2018 IECC, with some specific changes and amendments that only applies to Illinois. So for this adoption process, public opinion is also considered. So one way for you to participate in the amendment process is to submit the proposal shown on this slide. So it is asking your information, and also it asks you which section you would like to see the change, and you write down the reason and also add the cost impact information. So actually this proposal for this code cycle, the due date for this proposal has just passed. It was end of March. But we would like to just mention it. So for the next code cycle, you are aware of this adoption process. So if you have any opinion on changes on, energy code, you could submit this form. So we are almost at the end of our presentation, and we would like to have just a last poll. So we are asking which continuing education certificate you would like to have. Currently, we are offering CEUs for AEE and BPI, but we would like to know your feedback on this so we could use this information for developing our education module in the future. So while we are waiting for this response, also if you have questions, please type in the Q&A window so we can address those questions. And if somehow we could not answer your question today, then we will try to answer via email. So please email us at energycode@SEDAC.org. So there is a question if you will receive a PDF of this presentation. Yes, we will upload this presentation PDF to our website, and also the recording of this whole webinar. So it'll be available for you. And so another question came in, and it asked, can you insulate attic ceiling to comply with insulation above attic ductwork? Ryan?
Yes, this is one method. The portion that is important is that you not only would insulate the attic ceiling, but you would also insulate over your ductwork for this compliance. This is part of the reason with this, that you would insulate full depth over the ductwork, so that you end up with that continuous insulation barrier across the entire top. Sure.
So another question came in, and it asked, what was the new requirement for the transformers in commercial provisions?
The commercial, the requirement for transformers is they must be DOE 2016. They must meet the efficiency standard stated in the 2016 Department of Energy standard. That'll range depending on the size of the transformer. as well as whether it's single phase or three phase.
And there's another question. How can I obtain a copy of IECC 2018? So currently, we are not providing a physical copy of the code book 2018 IECC, but if you go to SEDAC website, you could see the link to the IECC website, which is the full version of the IECC 2018, the web version. So hopefully that helps. So another question came in. When is 2018 will be effective or adopted by Illinois? We do not have a definite answer yet, but we understand that it's going to be early 2019, and CDB will post that information when it's available. And another question, so what are the requirements for partial renovation, such as lighting or HVAC?
Renovations are covered under sections 500 and 600. That requires that the new equipment, that whatever equipment you are replacing meets the standard for the new construction. So if you are touching, if you're going to replace your heating system, that new heating system would have to be compliant. But like if you are just replacing a furnace, you don't have to go back and retest your ductwork and other provisions that are not affected by the specific item that you are working on.
We will wait a couple of more minutes for more questions while we are waiting. So for the completion of this webinar, we are going to send you the certificate, and also we'll send you the link to the survey. So if you could provide us a feedback on this webinar, that would be really great for us, because as we mentioned, we would like to use those feedback to develop our future energy code training modules. So we do not see any more questions coming up, but as we mentioned, please email us at energycode@sedac.org or call us at 1-800-214-7954 for any energy code related question, and we are happy to answer your questions. All right, then this concludes the webinar for today. Thank you, everyone.